schools. So hopefully that through this discussion, all of us will be better informed, not only what is happening in our public school, but also what is coming down so we can be in a proactive mood. When we are closing schools, or we're going before the community and saying we have to close schools, or the county commission asks for money for building consolidated school, we are reacting to emotion. We want to be in a position to be informed, hopefully to be proactive. And also, we hope to be preventive in some cases. Hopefully, we can be advocates strong enough we can prevent some of these very dangerous and discounting and undermining the public school system. It is my honor now to introduce the presenters. The presenters come from two organizations that are foremost in this whole advocacy region for the state. First is the Public School First. We have Dr. Hedda Kuntz, excuse me for messing up your name, and Dr. Yvonne Branton. Both of them have been acted. Dr. Brandon is the chair, and I think Dr. Kuntz is the director. So we introduce you first, and then secondly, we're following that would be the North Carolina Association of Educators. And Dr. Tammy Walker Kelly is a person who is the executive director, and she will present for her association. So take it. You have it.
All right, fantastic.
We're ready to listen to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I too am a student and product of public schools, as were my kids. They're out in college now, but this is dear to my heart, and I'm so pleased to be able to talk with you all today and share information and hear your feedback as well. I'm going to be talking about three main things: this dismantling of public schools that actually started more than a decade ago, focusing on the near term, especially with vouchers. Mention a little bit about charter schools. I know all of you are probably very familiar with charter schools, but just a little bit more information there. And then some funding inequities that we've researched a little bit and just want to bring to the surface as some talking points. But before we jump in, I wanted to let you know that Public Schools First has put together a lot of information, and Yvonne's going to share some resources later on. But one of them is this privatization timeline. It's a 2-pager, and the link is on the slide here, but we'll also put it in the chat. So when you have time to peruse, you can see that there's detailed information, or more detailed information about all the steps that have gone on since 2011 to really harm our teaching profession, damage our public schools, et cetera. And then this move toward privatization, it's been going on for a while, and it's been ramping up every year. But this is a good resource to take a look and see what's happening in more detail. Just very briefly, I'm going to just mention a couple of the high points. So back in 2011, the legislature removed the cap on charter schools. So now we have 211 charter schools. Staff did not increase, however, so there's many fewer people looking over the charter schools. So the quality there there's fewer staff to be able to attend to that. They cut the NC Teaching Fellows program, which was a really wonderful pipeline for quality educators throughout the state, especially in rural areas. They brought it back a few years later, but at a much smaller size, and it still is not back to where it was when it was cut in 2011, even though we have a desperate need for teachers across the state. So, and then the budget was slashed, master's pay was cut, benefits were cut for teachers. We got the A to F school grading system, which really does a disservice to our educators, especially with its focus on test scores instead of growth. Growth is just, as you can see, they're a small portion of it. The voucher programs were launched. We got more vouchers in 2017, class size issues with lack of funding. So it just goes on and on and on, things that the legislators have been doing. And at the same time, they've been cutting our corporate income tax. So back in 2013, it was 6.9%. Now it's 2.5%, which is it's the lowest of states that have income tax, corporate income tax in the nation. So we're already lowest in the nation, and they have plans to cut it down to 0. So we're really losing funding for our schools. They could stop that cut, so these are all things that we hope will change soon. Again, in 2022, the Supreme Court passed a ruling that the legislator needed to fund the Leandro, a couple of years of the Leandro, the comprehensive remedial plan, which, as you know, which would provide much needed resources for districts across the state. Well, the legislative leaders are fighting back on that, and it went back to the Supreme Court just this last February. So we're going to wait and see what happens there. But our legislative leaders are just resisting providing adequate fundings for our schools. It's horrible. And in just this past year, teachers' starting salaries, we're 46th in the nation. We've had the Bill of Rights and culture wars, which have exacerbated issues around education. And then we have a continuing budget that fails to keep up with inflation. So just all of these things are accruing and causing more and more challenges for our public schools. So I'm going to shift and talk specifically about vouchers. They've been in the news a lot lately for a lot of reasons. This is a place where dollars are coming directly from the budget. And instead of being used on something that helps all students, because public schools serve all students, funding is going to the private sector, and specifically private schools. So North Carolina has 2 types of voucher programs. One is for students with disabilities. It's the smaller program, but it allows up to $17,000 depending on the disability that the student has. And this is often provided in the form of money to the parents in a little debit card. And funding can also go to private schools to pay for tuition. But the larger program is these opportunity scholarship vouchers. They're not really scholarships. They're just vouchers coming from the state directly to the private school to pay for the tuition. And so the family doesn't get the money. It goes straight from the state to the school. And the amount of the voucher is tied to the per pupil expenditure. So it goes up every year. So vouchers were originally targeted for low-income families that were attending public school. And like I said, the funding is tied to the PPE, so it goes up every year. So that's how they were initially passed. That was what the goal was, presumably. But ever since they were first passed, the eligibility requirements have been loosened, and the amount that people are allowed to gain in funding has been increased. And last year it was the worst. So in 2023, the legislature dropped the requirement for anyone to have gone to public school. So now anyone, regardless of whether they have ever walked through the doors of a public school, is eligible for a voucher, state money, to go to private school. And the eligibility requirements were adjusted so that now the family income is on a sliding scale, and at the top end there is no end. So people of any income level can apply to get state taxpayer dollars to send their child to private school. So what you see here in this chart is these tiers that they have now. So previously it was just tier 1 and 2 families. So basically, so tier 1 families that have incomes at or below 100% of the federal free and reduced lunch income eligibility. And this year, for this year's applicants, that's $57,720. Those families are eligible for 100% of the per pupil allocation, which this year is about $7,400. Then the next tier is families making up to 200% of that federal free and reduced lunch income eligibility. So that brings the income eligibility up to about $15,000 a year. This is all for a family of 4. And then they're eligible for 90%. Then the tier 3 and 4, these are families that were never part of the voucher system until this year's application process. So that's 200 to 450% of the free and reduced lunch. And that's 100 this year for a family of four, $115,000 annual income up to $259,000. They're eligible for 60% of the voucher, which is about $4,400. And then families making more than $250,000 a year are also eligible. They're called tier 4, and they get 45% of that per pupil expenditure. So the floodgates really opened this year. And in 2023, they also allocated a lot more. They're opening it up to a lot more people, so they wanted to add a lot more dollars. And so what you see here in red is what was added, or it's actually, from this year's budget. So you can see how those numbers just went up and up and up. But what's really interesting, and not in the media very much, is prior to 2021, the vouchers were not, all the funds that went to vouchers were not used every year. They were underutilized. But people, people who are pro-choice and pro-privatizing and damaging public education wanted more people to learn about the vouchers and apply to the vouchers. So what they did starting in 2021 is they allocated $500,000 per year to market the program and help families apply. So they were driving money toward people, to private school folks and people to apply for these vouchers. And in 2023, with all of this expanded funding, they doubled that marketing budget to $1 million a year, just to market the program. And this is money that could be going to traditional public schools. Instead, it's going to marketing a voucher program. So with the 2023 allocations, we're looking at spending $5 billion on vouchers, on private school education for people by the year 2020, 32, 33. So it's a lot of money that could be going toward our public schools. I keep saying that, but it's just so awful. But no surprise, with this expanded eligibility, anyone in private school can now apply for the voucher, right? So of course, a lot of people are going to who are already in private school. And the doubling of the marketing budget, there were record numbers of applicants for the voucher program this year. This was big in the news, and I was thinking, this is no surprise because it was marketed. Everyone can apply now, even if you already sent your kid to private school. So 72,000 people applied this year. But if we look at who applied, less than half are tier 1 and tier 2 families. So those are the folks who are eligible up until this huge expansion. With this new expansion in the tier 3 and tier 4 families, basically families making more than $115,000 and then no end in sight up at the top, they make more than half of these applicants. And over here, you can see the applications by combined tiers. They're 32,400 in tier 1 and 2. Traditionally, using data from previous years, be only about 44 to 51%, depending on the year, of those applicants, people who applied and were offered vouchers, actually used them. So this number, those people, that number is going to go down a lot. But we had 72,000 apply, and of course, people who are pro voucher are touting that number, right? And they say, wow, we really need a lot more money to fund all of these vouchers. And that House Leader Tim Moore just said last week that one of his priorities is going to be adding $300 million for next year so that everyone who applied for a voucher can get one. And really what that means is that $300 million is going to those tier 3 and tier 4 families. Mm-hmm. It's not going to the public schools that need it. It's going to the wealthier families who just want that money to pay for private school. And many of them, if North Carolina is like most other states, the majority of the people who end up getting vouchers when it's universal like this already had their children in private school. So they didn't necessarily, anyway, it's a transfer of funds to rich, wealthy private school families. So the authority that handles the vouchers is the North Carolina State Education Authority. I forget exactly what that is. But anyway, they have a website, and you can go on there anytime and see by county where the money's going. So you can see here, this voucher money is not being distributed across the state at all. It's going, this is Cumberland, Wake, Charlotte, Met, Guilford, and then the lighter blue are like, you know, Asheville area, Port Salem, et cetera. So it's pulling money that should be going to rural, you know, across the state. And it's you know, the money from that pie is not being used where it needs to be. And I put in a few counties here, but you can go on their website and see how many and how much money is being used private education through these vouchers for any county on their website. So what's also interesting is that the demographics of who is using these vouchers has drastically changed over the years. When they first started out, you can see here about 51% of the voucher recipients were African American or Black, and 27% were white, this first down. Now, this year, it's completely reversed and it's gotten even a larger gap. So now 63% of the recipients this year are white and only 9% are Black or African American. The Hispanic population has gone up from 8 to 15%, but the demographics overall have changed so much, and we anticipate that that gap is going to grow even more. You're going to have a larger percentage of white families accepting those vouchers since it's now open to everyone. You didn't have to go to public school, et cetera. So it's really shocking. And something to point out, I am not going to go through all this. This is on our website also. I don't know, Yvonne, if you're going to put the link to this in the chat, but you can get it on our website and we can send that out. Vouchers have almost no accountability. So if you, traditional public schools are highly regulated. They have a curriculum standards, the North Carolina Standard Course of Study that they need to follow. They are assessed on that. They, teachers must be credentialed or seeking a credential. They accept all students. They provide transportation, lunches, etc. None of that is the case in private schools. There's no curriculum requirement. They could just not teach a curriculum at all if they don't want to. Their teachers don't have any credential requirements, and the school gets to choose the educational requirement of their teachers. So they could say that the teachers don't even need to have a high school diploma to teach at that school. Background check, safety background checks at a private school, only one staff person who is the highest decision-making authority is required to pass a criminal background check. In public schools, every staff person is required to pass a criminal background check. So the difference in the accountability and transparency and safety and accessibility, it's just black and white here. It's just like there's no difference or there's no comparison. And this is where we're spending our money more and more to these unaccountable schools. And private schools often discriminate in their admissions policies. So public schools first did a report where we looked at the admission. We actually went to the websites and looked at the admission policies of private schools that received $100,000 or more in 2022-23 from the state. And we found massive, very explicit, in very large numbers of discriminatory policies. As you can see, like it was based on academics, disability, gender, LGBTQ status, lifestyle, religion. And they also have a good fit or right fit language that is used a lot in the admissions information. And we found that even if there wasn't an explicit discriminatory policy, a lot of schools require a family interview or a student interview with the school administration to determine if the family or the student is the right fit for the school. And so we see that as an avenue for additional discrimination that is not as explicit as it is in some policies. And what I have up here is an example that we found in a policy handbook for a private school that basically says we don't take any students that have special learning needs. They don't offer specific learning disability, et cetera. And in the second paragraph says, due to resources, the school may not be able to accept students with certain 504 medical conditions and acceptance will be determined on a case-by-case basis. So there are many examples of this where the private school, even though they're taking state money, they say, well, we cannot accept your students. We cannot educate, your student. And so we do not believe public tax dollars should be going to these schools. So shifting quickly to charter schools, like I said, the charter schools have grown in number quite a lot. They've doubled since the cap was taken off. And in this doubling, a lot of for-profit management organizations have come in. So the kind of charter schools that has really come in lately is very different from the kind of charter schools that were emerging in the mid, in late 90s and early 2000s. Anyway, they come in and the promise of charter schools is that it provides an innovative opportunity for kids, and the students are going to grow and flourish, and it's going to be a better alternative in some cases than in the traditional private school. More and more research is showing, and this is nationally as well as in North Carolina, that that's just not the case. And so what I have here is just showing that when we look at student growth, since 2016-17, traditional charter schools have performed and helped students grow in their academic skills. This is based on the end of grade and end of course test, more than charter schools across the state. So why are we spending money for this alternative when our traditional schools, in most cases, and when we aggregate it, are doing better for our kids? I want to point out another thing that's happening, or it has happened in the traditional and charter school case here. In January, actually this was allocated in last year's budget, but they released $35 million in grants, school safety grant awards. And this is for public schools, so it's traditional public schools and charter schools. And when they released this, they listed all of the districts, all of the schools and districts that received the money. And so we took a look at it. The money, I should say, could be used for lots of things for school safety, like equipment, cameras, vape detectors, etc. But it could also be used for professional development for staff and for services for students that would include school-based mental health services. So you can see how this money is really needed for students across the state. They're really experiencing challenges. This is in the news a lot. Mental health challenges, anxiety, trauma. But when you look at the grant allocations, and you look at the number of students served in the schools and the districts that receive the money, traditional public schools received far fewer dollars per student than charter schools. And we took a look at districts in the Northeast region and looked at some specific ones. And I shared this at the earlier forum too, but I went through it pretty quickly. In the different colors, we have traditional schools and then the charter schools in that county that received funds. So not all schools received funds. So in Granville County schools received a grant, as did Falls Lake Academy and Oxford Prep. But per student, Granville County schools received less than half of what the charter schools received. In Halifax, it's worse. Halifax County schools received, on a per student basis, $72. Hobgood charter schools received almost 3 times as much for school safety. So I don't know how dangerous and problematic Hobgood is, but I think that would be an interesting question. Why did they receive so much more than the traditional public schools? And when we look at Vance County schools, again, Henderson Collegiate received more than double what Vance County schools received on a per student basis. So this is a case where the traditional public schools are receiving less. Why? But this is funding that could be and should be going to serve the students in public schools, because charter schools don't have to accept all students. They have more regulations than private schools, but there are many that they don't have that traditional public schools have, and they select students as well. So we believe that the money should be going to traditional public schools. So that's my portion of data sharing for you. I'm going to turn it over to Tamika and take it away talking about teachers.
Excellent. So first, good evening, everyone. My name is Tamika Walker-Kelly. I am an elementary music teacher from Fayetteville, Cumberland County, and I currently serve as president of the North Carolina Association of Educators, NCAE, which is the state's largest professional organization for public school workers here in the state. And so we get to talk a little bit about how um, all of these things sort of intersect together. And first, we'll start by talking about the lack of investment in our public schools not only harms our physical resources, but it also impacts the way that we are able to fund educator positions here in our state. So as you see this graphic cartoon on the slide, it has a revolving door, and that is because you all have probably heard or even experienced as a parent or caregiver that we are seeing educators being pushed out of the profession here in North Carolina due to the conditions here in our state. Just this past month, earlier this month, the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction talked through the State of Teaching report. And it is an annual report that comes out every year that talks through the numbers of educators who are leaving the state of North Carolina or the teaching profession in general. And I say being pushed out because these educators love the profession, they love the career, they love to teach. However, there's a number of factors that contribute to them choosing to leave the profession, not of their own volition, but because the conditions in North Carolina have gotten so bad. I will tell you that some of the top reasons that educators are forced out of the profession, many of them list personal reasons as their biggest concern. And there are a number of ways that we could talk about personal reasons, but I have talked to an educator who called me on Facebook Messenger from her classroom who was ready to turn in her keys that day because she was overburdened with the task, felt stressed and overwhelmed, and wanted to walk away from teaching. Even though you're supposed to put in a 30-day notice, she was ready to leave that day, right? And risk losing her teaching license because it had just become untenable. We have educators that leave the profession and go to another state. And for many of you who are on this call who are on border counties to Virginia, or our counterparts who are on border counties to South Carolina, we know there's a substantial salary difference that our educators can gain when they go to either one of those counties. North Carolina is no longer leading in the Southeast when it comes to educator pay. We are now lagging behind states such as Alabama and Mississippi. Just this week, actually, we had a North Carolina teacher who taught in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and has now went over the state line to Virginia to work for Norfolk Public Schools. And so we are seeing educators leave at a number of rates. And so here on the screen, you see that what we call attrition, that's what the formal term is for when educators leave the profession, is the highest that it has ever been in quite some time. And in these counties that are listed here, you can see their rates as well. We know that in some of our rural counties and northeastern counties, we see far more higher attrition rates than we do in some of our urban counties. Next slide, please. So what we have here is that we know that the professional salaries of our teachers have not kept up with inflation. And so while the General Assembly has stated that they have provided raises to educators, that's not actually factually or mathematically correct. It essentially amounts to a pay cut when inflation is 7% and you only offer teachers a 3% raise, then you're actually getting underpaid. And so we see that our starting salaries are still below the national average, and we continue to see our surrounding states increased their base salary, which means stripping all of the bonuses or incentives for master's degrees, which North Carolina no longer pays for unless you had your master's degree prior to 2013, or unless your job requires a master's degree, taking away longevity pay. So unless you have any special designations, the base salary continues to lag among our neighboring states, just in the Southeast alone. Next slide. And so NCAE conducted a poll which ran from November 23 to December 23. Apologize for my error on the slide. And in a recent poll of likely North Carolina voters, more than 80% said that $37,000 was too low for a starting salary for teachers. And so we know, and this was across party lines. This was a poll that reached out to a very diverse scope of North Carolinians, ranging from different racial demographics and also political demographics as well. And so more than 80% of the people that responded to the poll thought that 37,000 was too low. And more than 70% of likely voters said that 54,000, which is the salary cap for teachers in the state of North Carolina, was not enough for our teachers. So once you get to year 25, you cannot increase your base salary beyond $54,000. So you just cannot get paid any more than that. And so, but our North Carolina residents, our likely voters, say that they know that our educators are not being paid professionally. So that is something that unites us across the board and across the political spectrum. So what we see here is that both our beginning teachers are really important to us, and we want to retain them, and we know that salary is the key to do that. But we also know that experience matters here, and our veteran educators, our more experienced educators, are also important to North Carolina voters. And so we want to ensure that they are well paid, well compensated for the important work that they do with students every single day. Next slide. So what we see here is this chart that shares that because the state is not fulfilling its responsibility and obligation to fund schools appropriately and adequately as they should, that we see lots of local governments trying to step up and fill the gap to retain educators in their respective areas. And so many counties, both the work of the local school board in conjunction with their county commissioners, have tried to raise the local teacher supplement. So this is what school systems will pay to teachers once they complete their year of service for the school year. Some school districts pay it throughout the school year. Some do half in the fall and half in the spring. And then some pay out their supplements at the end of the school year. And so the state is shifting the burden to local government, which unfortunately the locals' role in funding schools, of course, is to create a budget through the local Board of Education, but also the county commissioners usually focus on capital needs around the school system. So that's like school buildings, school maintenance, things of that nature. Next slide. But what we see here in our poll that we conducted is that our North Carolina voters want the state, and I emphasize the word state, want the state to invest more in our public school students and educators and in our school systems. So more than 70% of likely voters say that we need to increase our per student spending. So the money that is allocated for each single public school student, we need to increase it to $15,000 or more. Right now, the state's contribution to funding our student hovers around $11 $1,000 per student, meaning that we spend the least out of the Southeast in funding the education of our students here in North Carolina. Next slide, please. So coming up, the North Carolina General Assembly will be convening in what is titled the short session. And during the short session, they will be discussing bills that might be filed last year that passed one chamber but not the other. And they may also take up any other bills related to funding. So I'm putting this on your radar as people who want to be engaged political citizens in the process. A couple of things you should be watching out for during the legislative short session. So you heard Heather talk about voucher expansion being passed during the last long session. And what we are hearing from news reports and from our conversations with legislators going into this short session, that there is talk about expanding the funding for more vouchers so that, like Heather said, that more of those tier 3 and tier 4 families, meaning top earners more than $150,000 a year, will have access to more money to allow their students to go to private schools. That is what we're hearing. We have also heard that they may take up discussions around possible raises for teachers and other support staff. But we will, of course, wait and see if that is coming. But we also have heard from coalitions of pro-public school legislators that they will be highlighting all of the bills that were filed in this last long session that could have enhanced our public schools and the work of public school educators across the state, and counting and bringing that to light to show that this current leadership in the General Assembly could have done more to invest in our public schools. So the short session usually runs from April to the end of June. We are hearing that this short session might actually be short this year. So it might it might actually be short this year. For example, some of you have probably heard that the legislative session has, continued way past their June 30th deadline. But we're hearing that the legislative session might actually be short this year. So that remains to be seen. So next slide, please. So a couple of things that we want you to know. So as the organization that works on behalf of educators, and when I say educators, that is an all-encompassing term. So that means your classroom teachers, your bus drivers, your custodians, your principals, your superintendents, your central office staff, to your librarians, to your school social workers, to even substitute teachers. We have membership in all of those. We are going to be conducting another bipartisan poll of voters because we know that voters' attitudes change throughout the year. So this was, pre the March primary when we did our first poll. We'll be doing another one to see what voters' attitudes and mindsets are around public education. We will be hosting house parties, and we hope that you will come to share more about issues related to public education so that you can come and ask your questions. For example, if you are still more curious about vouchers, or you want to know about what happens in a school district when the federal money runs out, because that is a thing that we are looking forward to talking about. And you will hear many of our local chapters talking about spring budget campaigns. So we will be hosting house parties all the way up to the November 2024 election to put public education on the ballot. And then, of course, as an organization, we'll be planning for the long session. So the long session for everyone is where they will actually be talking about budget writing and crafting the next 2 years of the state budget. So we will be heavily involved in that because educators need to be in spaces where decisions about education are made. And so we try to make sure that we are present and accounted for in those spaces. So we want to make sure that we are building momentum towards the next long session. And so hopefully you all are thinking of really good questions to ask as we transition to our next slide. So thank you all so much for letting me share this information with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so
Mine?
we're okay. Which slide are we going to go to, Heather, now? Something's going on. Okay. Are we going backwards, Heather, or forward?
Your comments, advocate.
Okay, right there. Okay, so one of the things that we're just a few more slides and then we'll be open for questions and answers. But one of the things that we do think is important, and I think Ms. Clanton and Ms. Clayton basically said these things at the very beginning. It's very important that we get everybody involved, that everybody becomes educated. One of the things that I like to talk about a lot is that we want people to be educated and we want them to be voters. So we want them to be educated voters. And that's one of the reasons that we were honored to be a part of this webinar tonight, because we want people to understand that, you know, the tremendous impact that vouchers have already had on our state and will have over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years if we do not figure out a way to hold them in check. They're not scholarships. Every time I use that word, I talk about school vouchers. Opportunity scholarships are not earned. They're not scholarships that turn. They're free money right now for, in many cases, the wealthy families. Let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about some resources. One of the things that we care very deeply about, and Heather's going to post these links into the chat right now, is we want you to be prepared. So we have spent a lot of time creating school district and county data sheets. We have a Google Drive set up. It's open to the entire public. We're going to put that link in the chat. One of the reasons we want your emails is so that if you'd like to get these links in one email, so you don't have to worry about trying to collect them here. And if you want to be able to communicate with us, we would love to have your email. But the resources that I want to talk about very briefly is these county data sheets, and we'll show you one in a minute. The other thing is that we have some fabulous newsletters. I put a link in there to the one that was just done last week on teacher salaries. A lot of the stuff that President Kelly talked to you about is in that newsletter, plus more links and more fact sheets. And we have a lot of our past newsletters. I'm going to ask Heather to also look at our sheet and put in there a link to the newsletter that we had a few weeks ago. And this, actually, I have it right here. Let me just copy and scoop it in here, because this newsletter that I've just put in there has all of these resources in there, how you can get your county data. Another thing that Heather's worked on really hard is how to contact your elected officials. So we have a page on our website where you can go in and find your legislator and email them directly. Okay, and you can communicate to them hopefully about vouchers and about other things that concern you or worry you in your community. We also have a petition page. We have a petition up right now on school vouchers, asking them to stop, to not give any more money to vouchers and to make them accountable. So vouchers kind of do a series of egregious things in our view. One, they take taxpayers' money and spend it on wealthy families, and they have no accountability. You've worked in a public school. You understand that every penny spent has to be shown to the public. There are public audits, There are no audits given to the public. So taxpayers are funding a black box. They don't know what goes in and what comes out. The other thing is there's no student accountability. You know, the tragedy that we've faced in our state of having schools labeled. They're a B school, they're a D school. Well, guess what? In a private school, that requirement is not there. In fact, there is nothing reported to the public to let us know if our children are even succeeding or not. And then the last thing that the vouchers do that we're asking for a stop to is they are allowed to discriminate. They can say, you're not a fit. You're not the right religion. You're not the right learning style. So here's an example we pulled up. I want to show you that we've created a fact sheet like this for every single school district, and we have much, much more. And you can see pretty quickly here, look at the teacher salary supplement differential for Warren County, right? 2588 versus a state figure of 4287. So, right, we're immediately there's a penalty for teaching in a smaller rural county that doesn't have the same local tax base. That's wrong. That's wrong. Okay, and the other thing is you see there are other indicators that show what's happening in counties. Now, on the second page here, we've put in there what will happen if they fully funded Leandro. As you know, 2 of your counties were originally involved, and Rodney Pierce is here tonight, history teacher who's taught me everything I know about Leandro, and he's certainly welcome to chime in when we get to the question section. But we've been begging the courts for 25 years to fully fund our public schools. The courts have said over and over again, you qualify. And we know that just in Warren County, you would be getting almost $5 million a year, more than you're getting now. Think what that could do. And now we've also had the Office of State Budget and Management talk about, well, what about school vouchers? What's going to happen there? Well, we are predicting if nothing changes too much, you're going to lose over almost $600,000 over the impact of the voucher program right now. One of the things that we like to talk about also is when you see this expansion in vouchers, we've been told several times, and I've talked to Congresswoman Clayton about this, how some rural counties right now are saying, well, this doesn't really impact us. Yes, it does. Because one, you're paying taxes into a program that's mostly in urban, suburban, rich counties. 2, that's money that could come into your county for a variety of community projects, not just schools, roads, bridges. And then 3rd, that money is not coming to your school. And your children are not having the benefit of those extra $5 million. And then the last thing is that now there aren't a lot of private schools in rural areas, but we understand, just like Tamika said, from our media sources and from associations and reading and keeping track of these things, that large religious organizations are actually training right now, like the Catholic Church is providing training to their churches to help them grow their private school program, right? So we know that eventually it will impact rural schools. And the first thing that happens, they take away your funding and your students, and then they close your schools. And that has happened over and over again in every state that has gone down this path. And once those schools are closed, the next thing that happens, as you know, is your top employer in 92 counties out of 100 in North Carolina, the public school system is the top 3 employer. So there's some very dire things that can happen if we don't stop this voucher expansion. But let's stop, and I encourage you to unmute yourself and ask your questions. You can, if you haven't put them in chat, and I don't really see a lot here, you are very welcome to just unmute yourself and ask your question. This is a family event, so just speak up, and somebody will try to take an opportunity to answer you.
Hi, this is Earlene Middleton with the Eva Clayton World Food Institute and Sigma Tau Omega Sorority in Cary. I have a question on one of the slides, if you could go back, that compares the amount of monies for the counties, the charter school versus the public or traditional school. And I want to make sure that I understand it correctly. That one. So I see Granville County Schools with an S, right? this is the amount of money that they receive, and per student, this is much. But for one school, the Oxford Preparatory School, just one school, this is how much they get. So you telling me for all the public schools in Granville County, this is all they get, but one school, one charter or private school gets this much money.
Yes, that's correct. So what the state published was the grant dollars per, county or whatever. So it was Granville County Schools received $150,000. Well, we can look up at the statistical profile how many students are in Granville County Schools, and that's where this number comes from. So Oxford Prep School got $40,000 from this grant. They had 851 students, and so you do the math, and that's where it comes from. So like here, you've got Halifax and Hobgood. They both got large sums, but Halifax is serving many, many, many more students than Hobgood charter schools. So that's where these numbers came from.
And keep in mind that you said it exactly right. Granville County schools are many schools, right? They're elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. So that money had to go a lot of places, right? And probably didn't get to do very much. But one little program, okay, got $40,000.
Yeah, that's why putting in the number of students really helps to show the disparities.
Nakia Smith, please ask your question.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I am representing also Sigma Tau Omega, chapter of Alpha Kappa Sorority, Alpha Sorority Incorporated, as well as NC Counts Coalition. I'm a little confused where or how, and maybe I'm not sure if you guys can answer this question actually, but how is it the state had $300 million to invest in the voucher program, but there seems to be no budging at all on teacher salaries? Because I'm pretty sure from a parent perspective, sometimes it's a little more attractive to go to the charter schools or to go to the private schools where there's smaller classrooms and the hopes of teachers paying more attention to your kids. But I'm not seeing where that's being addressed there, because apparently there's money, but like I don't quite understand why or what's the difference in the breakdown. Can anybody explain that?
So let's stop sharing our screen because we don't have any other slides, and that maybe we can all see and connect it a little bit better. I think your question is, why is the money going to vouchers and not going to teacher pay? Is that kind of the gist of what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay, so that is the question of the day, right? Because what really is frustrating us, and we've even, and many people have said, is stop funding vouchers until we fully fund our public schools. Even, I believe that the private schools getting state money is unconstitutional and should be illegal, but that's not how it is. But since it is, we're saying very clearly, Nikita, that we need to make whole our public schools. We need to make sure that teachers are being paid even somewhere close to the national average. We need to stop teachers from leaving the classroom, and this is true to some degree even in a charter school, right? The teacher pay schedule. So anyway, Tamika, I'd like for you to take a stab at this because you represent these educators who are suffering under this inflation-controlled, inadequate funding.
Yes. So the first simple answer is that it really is a political choice of the current legislators in Raleigh. So there's also a number of factors that go into creating funds or allotting funds for schools. So one of the things is that most of our public schools are funded out of what they call the general fund. So when we pay taxes to the state and when the state generates revenue, all that money goes into sort of a big bucket and then it's allocated. So the choices of the current leadership of the General Assembly has decided to allot this money to private school vouchers instead of invested it in teacher pay. And I say teacher, but I mean educator, because we also have seen very slow investments in our support staff, like our bus drivers and cafeteria workers and custodians. And that is because also, unfortunately, around some partisan politics, around different competing visions of what is the purpose and function of public schools. So unfortunately, sometimes we see our public schools and the narrative around teacher pay being used during election cycles to garner some sort of political favor, but not necessarily seeing a real true investment in our public schools by raising educator pay. So we continue as an organization to advocate for investing in our students. And when we say investing in our students, we mean raising the per student funding. We mean investments in student mental health resources, universal breakfast and lunch programs, but then also the recruitment and retention of highly qualified educators in our school systems across the state. And so we know that, though, I will tell you that on the horizon, that our state is running into a revenue problem. Even though they have banked money in quote unquote a rainy day fund, because because the corporate tax has been lowered to zero, as what Heather had mentioned earlier. When new corporations come into the state, new businesses come into the state, they don't have to pay taxes like they have to do in other places. And so we are losing revenue for our state to be able to allot more money to critical public good programs such as our public schools.
And I'll add one quick comment, and then Mr. Davis, I'm going to let you ask your question. The most important thing I also wanted to share, Nakia, is that research, and this is decades of research, shows that what's really the most important thing is the person standing in front of the classroom. That certified, educated, well-trained, prepared, experienced teacher is what the difference between children succeeding and children who don't succeed as well. And so the fact that we're snuffing out the pipeline, we're making it unattractive to enter the profession, we're making it impossible to stay in the classroom in terms of the penalty you get for staying and teaching. Is creating a situation where our public schools will not have that very best person sitting in front of that classroom. And that's cheating generations of our children. Mr. Davis, please ask your question.
Thank you so much. I actually don't have a question. I have more of a comment from a status of, number one, being the neighbor of Congresswoman Eva Clayton. And if I don't make sure that I get this point across, she'll get me very quickly. But being married to a educator, my wife's a math teacher, being a county commissioner in Warren County, 3 terms, being a servant leader of myself, and also definitely being a candidate for state senate, District 2. So the direct answer to everything that we are speaking about today is that we have to definitely elect people who are going to do the business for us, period, hands down. People such as myself, and there are a lot of great candidates out there that put their name on the line in order to get that happen. Sometimes we're going to be speaking to the wall of leadership right now, that they hear us, they know we're coming. Sometimes they hear us, sometimes they don't. But of course, we know that they are not moving the needle in our direction in order to facilitate what we are trying to get in growth here. So we got to get behind good people that's going to able to go to Raleigh and actually do something. That's the downright portion of it all. Because if we don't, public schools as we know it is going to disappear right before our eyes. And it is just going to be a catastrophe of many of our communities. As a county commissioner, as I digress in my conversation, is this right here. I have always supported the Warren County schools as much as we can. I wish that we could pay them a lot more, but as we know, property taxes are only much you can get from that, and without breaking the bank. And there is no way rural communities can stay on the pathway of local tax dollars doing what the state is supposed to be doing anyway. There's just not enough there. And if we don't get behind great candidates such as myself and other people that's already on the pathway of getting there, we're gonna be a losing force. That is my comment. Thank you so much for everything that everybody's doing.
And you really hit on a lot of points. So just to emphasize one, a lot of poor, smaller counties are paying more taxes than rich urban counties. Many of the counties in your area pay more, a higher tax rate, okay, than Wake County pays. Okay, because and so many of our rural, smaller, even small suburban counties cannot afford to pick up the tab for what should be constitutionally and legally the right of every public education student in the state. And that is the truth. You know, the feeding our children, right? We can afford to feed our children. We should have school meals for all. There shouldn't be a charge that we should have to pay for our children to come to school and eat. We should have universal pre-K. These are things that work. The research shows they work. When you feed kids, they can pay attention. When your kids have a head start or a pre-K start, they do much better. So Mr. Davis is exactly right. We kind of know what works, right? We know what works. We have evidence, facts, research. We know what works. And what we see going on for the last 14 a decade and a half is making decisions are being made on Jones Street that do not adapt to reality and facts and research. And what we're doing is we are actually harming our children and cheating them of the education they deserve. Is there anyone else that wants to make a comment? Ms. Johnson, I see you. Please
Yes.
go right ahead.
I have a little feedback here.
Ms. Johnson, if you you might have to put your comment in the chat or ask your question in the chat.
Rodney,
We cannot hear you, Ms. Johnson. So sorry. Did you happen to accidentally join twice? Sometimes that will. While she is working on that, is there anyone else?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, you got it?
Good afternoon, evening, everybody, and thank you so much for this very informative webinar. And one of the questions that I struggle with is trying to understand what role might our elected officials and our school board members play at these legislative sessions. What difference, how would their voices matter if they attended these legislative sessions and made demands about equity for small rural counties like Warren County?
Well, I want to say something quick, and I want to ask anyone who has an opinion to answer this question, but we have realized this. We have been knocking and beating and pounding on the doors downtown Tamika for a decade, right? But we know that really usually what makes more influence is what's going on in your community. When your commissioners and your school board members and your mayors and your church leaders, when they talk to your elected officials that come to Raleigh, they seem to have more influence. And of course, your vote is your influence, right? Who you send. You know, if people don't do you right, don't keep sending them back. And, you know, that's the most important thing we can say. But in my view, Ms. Johnson, you guys have the strongest, most powerful voice. And using it, it has to, you know, it is encouraged. Ms. Williams, is it Shauna Williams?
Yarborough Williams.
Yarborough, hey, Mr.
Yes, how you doing?
Good.
Gentlemen, Assembly set the staff, do they set the salary for teachers' pay? I mean, I
Yes.
said, I saw it in the chat that you're talking about, the salary as low as 54,000. Once you get to 54,000, you can't go any farther. That's a shame. And who lobbied for the teachers during those budget hearings?
So I'll take this one. So yes, the salaries are set by the state legislature.
So we need to do something about them.
Well, yes, sir. We absolutely do. So they are set by the state legislature. Any of the base salary is supplemented by the local school district. So the local school district may add additional monies on top by position or by the local supplement that is funded by the county commissioners.
Yes, I understand that.
But the base salary itself is set by the General Assembly. Now, I am the president of NCAE, which is the state's largest organization for all school educators, and I am a registered lobbyist. So myself, my vice president, our staff, we go down 3 to 4 days a week when they are in session, and we have meetings with legislators. We also invite our members, so they have to take a day off though. We invite our educators to come and speak with their representatives and across party lines. And we also encourage our public education allies to come and join us. During the last session, we had 3 days where we invited all of our public school educators and allies to come and set up meetings with their legislators. And we will do a couple during this short session, but we hear that, like I said, it's going to be very short. But we will also continue to do that in the long session. So if you ever want to join us while we go knock doors and sit in office on Jones Street, you are welcome to attend, and we extend the invitation to you.
But what we need to know as voters across the state of North Carolina is what people we need to target and get rid of that not allow teacher salaries to move further than 54,000. We need to be fighting that fight because those are the folks that make the decision about the salary.
Mr. Williams, and think about it. You want to hire a teacher and say, we want you to work nights, weekends, decorate your room, buy your own supplies, show up over and over again, take every child that walks through the door, and we want you to work your butt off for 25 to 30 years, and we're not going to ever let you get any higher than this salary. That's not very motivating.
I'm talking from experience as an educator. I had 33 years as an educator. So we need to do something about that crowd that have decided, okay, the salary is going to be at 54,000 and not above. We need to get rid of that crowd.
And
we need to know who that crowd of folk is. We need to start working on across the state.
Well, one thing I can tell you is that if you go to the NCLEG page, you can look up every single vote of every single member in the General Assembly, and you can look and see how they voted on the budget this year, who voted for it and who voted against it. In fact, some people who voted for it, I don't think will be showing up in November, after November. But that's how you can do that. And I'll be happy to send that link. Heather will send that link along with our others, how you can look up very, very quickly how everybody voted. But I can tell you this, y'all, please. This is going to take more than one county and one region. We need to have you talking to all your friends, your relatives, your sorority sisters, your fraternity brothers, your nieces and nephews all over the state, because this vote is all over the state, right? We can't just say, okay, we got our legislator or our House or Senate. We've got to really worry about what is going on in Hanover County and Swain County and Scotland County and Robeson County. So please help us get out the word. I want to go back to something I skipped over, and it's really important. We've started something called the North Carolina Public Education Network, NCPEN. And it's we're going to send you a link to that. And that page, we are trying to identify all the public education advocacy groups in every single county. So people can hover over it and find out who they can talk to in their county. Find out who's You know, if they have a local NCAE group, if they have a local PTA council, a local League of Women Voters, any of these groups that are dedicated to working for public education. So we need your help. And then the email we will send you, it'll have a link you can go on and look. Help us build this network, because the more we talk and the more we share information, the better chances we are at having pro-education elected officials. Heather, you.
Yeah, I just wanted to swing back to something that someone mentioned earlier about county commissioners and things like that. And a number of county commissions and school boards have created resolutions, and they've sent letters to the legislature, to the legislators, and written open letters. A group of school boards and superintendents wrote a very powerful letter against vouchers earlier in the spring that the governor has published, and it was across the state. So I think when we talk about our county commissioners, going to them locally, and the school boards, they can have a powerful voice as a body speaking to the whole legislature, right? And Ms. Clayton, I wondered if you wanted to speak to that a little bit. We spoke about it
Yes.
earlier, about that letter. Yeah,
Yes. Am I on? Did you, can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I think the letters, did you put the letter in the chat?
I haven't put the letter in the chat. Let me
Okay.
grab it and do that.
Okay, but let me speak, but there were 19 school superintendents in region, what was the region 1? And they include, I know of on this line, Halifax, Northampton, and Martin County. And certainly the other counties in the region should also consider that as an option. That is, that could be Warren, Franklin, Vance, Franklin, and Person County. If we could get the school board members to know who have responsibilities for implementing their teachers or implementing their program, if they would write a letter, if their school board members would write a letter, all of that would have an impactful result. If they put themselves on the line saying, we object, I think they would be heard. But more important, equally as important, being informed as what is happening in the General Assembly puts boards of education commissioners in a proactive way rather than in a reactive. You're reacting with to say they're not paying teachers what they don't pay. You're reacting saying they shouldn't close our schools. We ought to be part of the policy advocacy program that said, here are the policies that should be. So hopefully, as a result of us being better informed today, we want to take some action. We will want to use the opportunity to maybe join with the North Carolina Association of Educators during the short session. I don't know what days, but anyhow, we could either write a letter or we could be involved with our legislators. By the way, at least North Carolina has put one legislator out of business who voted against schools. And I think Rodney Pierce is here, who is an educator, who's been doing that. So we can't do that alone, but we can put that as a collective effort to find people who are willing to stand up for public education, stand up for equality, and not find those who are really fostering their own concerns.
And I would add that on April, Rodney, I'm going to get you 1 second, April the 24th, the first day of the new short session, at 11 o'clock on that day, there is a huge gathering. There's an invitation to the public to come and join with the repairs of the breach. Reverend Barber is going to be there. The NAACP is going to be there. The education advocates groups, we're going to be there. Tamika's going to be there. There's going to be a lot of people who want to show up the very first day,
okay,
even if they just stand on the sidewalk, right? Because what we want to do is send a powerful message that the people have come to the people's house to talk about the people's business. And I think that if you can come, if you can get a little carpool together and show up. It can be your church group, your sorority group, your public education group, or you can just come on with a bunch of girlfriends and boyfriends who are just mad about how we're being treated in our communities. Please come. Mr. Pierce, the Honorable Mr. Pierce.
Did he leave us? Right,
No, ma'am.
right, there you are. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to say a few things, and if I get off on a tangent, just stop me. Definitely want to echo what my good friend Commissioner Davis said about making sure that you elect the right people to office to advocate for you as citizens, and particularly for public education. I have been fortunate enough and blessed enough to be elected to represent Halifax, Northampton, and Warren counties in the North Carolina House of Representatives starting in January of 2025. But I can assure you that since everything has finally been made official, people have started treating me as if I'm already in office in terms of the things they've been asking and telling me they want done. I will say this. In terms of, as Commissioner Davis said, sending people to Raleigh to represent your best interest when it comes to public education, sending us to office, myself and Commissioner Davis, who I certainly hope and will try to help be successful in his bid. You got to keep sending us back. When a legislator continuously gets reelected, they build up what's called seniority. And that's when they get those special positions on those committees where they have more influence when it comes to laws that are passed, including the budget. My opponent was a 20-year incumbent who had some pretty significant chairmanships. And there are people within the counties that he previously served, that I will now serve, that were very, very, very supportive of him, but had no idea of his voting record. So when it comes to educating the voters, we got to have webinars like this, but we have to find some way to get them to people who may not have the interest, as we all on the call have, in public education, whether that's through the churches, through the civic groups, things of that nature. We have to somehow try to get people more politically engaged, because if not, we're going to keep electing people like my opponent who was no champion and no friend of public education. And I believe his tenure set back the counties that he was serving when it came to our public education systems. It might explain why some of them are in some state of disarray today. I also wanted to say, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mr. Pierce.
No, I also wanted to say that, excuse me, when you talk about commissioners, school board members, and other local elected officials, I welcome that. I think that, those letters that Congresswoman Clayton was talking about that was signed by those local superintendents who work at the pleasure of elected officials, being school boards, and then those school boards, in my case, the Halifax County Schools Board of Education and the Roanoke Rapids Greater Schools Board of Education adopting resolutions saying don't expand the voucher program. I think those were very, very big and monumental, and I used them in my campaign to basically point out how my opponent was not basically advocating for the desires of the people that he had been elected and sworn to serve. So I think in my campaign, what we did was we wanted to educate the voter, and I think the voters saw, allowed themselves to be educated, saw what was going on, and decided to make a different decision. But using the advocacy, as you were saying earlier, Congresswoman Clayton, of those local elected officials, of those school boards, the Warren County Board of Commissioners and the Warren County Schools Board of Education. I think both groups adopted the Leandro resolution, which is put out by Every Child in Seat, which is another coalition partner along with Public Schools First NC and NCAE. They did that a couple of years ago. So that laid some groundwork. Those are all things that can be used not only for advocacy, but also for political representation purposes, to point out candidates or legislators who do not serve the best interests of their constituents when it comes to traditional public education. And I think you just have to, we just have to make people aware of that, the voters aware of that, and the people who wouldn't traditionally vote, who have children in public schools we got to make them aware of that. It's like if you
Right.
don't want your child's school system to improve and get better, you're just going to sit back and complain all the time, and you're going to get off your butt and go do something about it. And the one thing you can do, if you don't want to do anything else, is you can go out there and exercise your right to vote.
Well
And
said.
Mr. Pierce, I'm gonna let that be the closing because I need to leave a few minutes here for Ms. Clayton, but I would say to everyone here, Heather and Tamika and I are willing to do whatever we can. If you want another seminar, you want another meeting, if you've got a church group that wants to have someone do a Zoom with us, we are available, because what our goal is to do what Rodney said. Because I'm telling you what has happened in every other state, that this has happened in with the vouchers. As they take away the money and they take away your students, and then one day they close your schools, and then the next day they start defunding public schools because they don't care about them anymore. Because what's left in public schools will be the kids who can't go anywhere else. It'll be the kids who don't have the money to make up what it takes to go to a private school, or transportation or meals to get to a private school. They don't have a ride to a charter school. And so what ends up getting left in their public schools are those who are the hardest to teach, most vulnerable children. And then when that happens in all the states that we've watched, and this has happened in the 50s, right? In the 60s and the 70s, y'all. Then they start cutting the money. Tamika told you they're heading for a funding cliff. They're spending a lot of money. They're cutting the corporate tax rate. At some point, they're not going to be able to afford this. And who do you think is going to get cut from the budget? They're not going to cut out their wealthy coupon voucher friends. They're going to start lowering the money they're putting in education, and it hurt those folks in private schools? Probably not very much, because they were already there and they could already afford it. It will hurt our children. And so I really encourage you to really take serious how serious this moment is in our state. And Ms. Clayton, I was hoping that you could do us some closing remarks.
Okay. Well, I think you've said it well. I think what it is for us to hear what has been said, but also to see where we play a role in it. The question is not so much that wrong is being done, but what do we who are committed think that we can do? To paraphrase Martin Luther King, he says, it's not so much what my enemies will do, or what my friends fail to do. What we fail to do sometimes as concerned citizens or leaders or elected leaders who care about what we care about, we fail to act to make the difference. And I want to thank all of you for being committed enough to learn more about it. And hopefully that commitment will mean that we will find a way to, and the members of the boards of education, maybe you will find a way to express yourselves collectively or individually. That's opportunity. And those of us who want to be involved in the first day of the short session, we will join Heather and Yvonne and Tamika, who will be there, and others. And education will be put on the table there. We're trying to put education. I hear you, Rodney. We are putting education on the election. We did it in the primary. And I'm talking with another group down in southern part of the state. They're putting education on the budget, on the election as well. And we have to put that in the consciousness of those who are being elected, but we also want to make it in the consciousness of those who are there as well, and those who are there in the short session. And even when those who we do not agree with, who are another party, we should not think that we can't be persuasive. Whether they agree with us or not, it is still our duty to make sure that they know there's a choice between helping people and not helping people. And I think that's our charge today. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you, our presenters. I think this has been a really helpful discussion. We went over a little time, but it was worth it all.